Hi, I'm Leila. The first time they called me the help was at a dinner party in their Hampton estate. I remember standing in the corner, watching my husband's family laugh over champagne. His mother looked right at me and said, "Why don't you check if the kitchen needs assistance?" That night I didn't argue, I didn't cry. 3 months later, when they arrived at my family's estate for the annual charity gala, I simply nodded at Charles, our head butler for 20 years. He bowed deeply and said, "Welcome home, Madam Owner." The look on their faces was worth every insult I'd ever swallowed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The message arrived just as I was finishing my morning tea. A group photo, all smiles and designer outfits, taken in the grand dining room of Ashton Manor, the most exclusive country club in Westchester County. The caption read, "Family celebration complete." My husband Jonathan's sister had tagged him, but not me. I studied the image. Crystal champagne flutes raised mid-toast. Jonathan's parents, Elizabeth and Richard, seated prominently at the center. His sisters, Vanessa and Camilla, with their investment banker husbands flanking them like designer bookends. Even my niece Olivia, barely 8, was there in a velvet dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everyone looked like they belonged in a luxury magazine spread. Everyone except me. Because I wasn't there, I hadn't been invited. I set my phone down and stared out the window of our Brooklyn brownstone. The early spring sunshine felt suddenly cold. I checked my messages again, scrolling through our family group chat. Nothing. No. "Hey Leila, we're having dinner tonight." No. "We missed you at Ashton Manor." Just silence and a photo that made it clear exactly where I stood in the hierarchy of the Preston family. I should have been used to it by now. 3 years of marriage to Jonathan, and his family still treated me like I was temporary, an unfortunate phase their Harvard-educated son would eventually outgrow. They never said it directly. The Prestons were too refined for that, but every interaction was laced with reminders that I didn't quite measure up. "Where did you attend university again, dear?" Elizabeth would ask, despite having heard my answer multiple times. "Such interesting customs you have," Richard would comment whenever I mentioned anything about my Lebanese heritage. But this, being completely excluded from a family dinner, felt different, more deliberate, like they'd finally stopped pretending. I called Jonathan. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail. I texted him, "Looks like a nice dinner. Didn't know you had plans tonight." I kept my tone light, casual. I didn't want to be the dramatic wife they already thought I was. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Jonathan's face appeared on the screen. "Hey, sorry I missed your call. I was in a meeting." "The one with the champagne toast?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. A pause. Too long to be innocent. "Ah, you saw the photo. It was just a last-minute thing. Mom wanted to celebrate Camilla's promotion." "Last minute?" I repeated. "So last minute you couldn't text me?" Another pause. "I didn't think you'd want to come. You always say these family things stress you out." The familiar knot formed in my stomach, the one that appeared whenever Jonathan rewrote reality to avoid conflict with his family. It wasn't that I didn't want to attend these gatherings. It was that I was tired of being treated like the help when I did. "Jonathan, this isn't about whether I would have wanted to go. It's about not even being given the choice." I heard muffled voices in the background, then his sister Vanessa's distinct laugh. "Look, I have to go. We'll talk about this when I get home, okay?" He hung up before I could respond. I sat there, phone in hand, and thought about all the times I'd swallowed my pride over the past 3 years. The accidental exclusions from family photos. The conversations that switched to French when I entered the room. The way Elizabeth insisted on introducing me as Jonathan's wife, instead of by my name. I thought about Jonathan's grandmother, the only member of his family who'd ever shown me genuine kindness, and what she'd told me just before she passed away. "Don't let them dim your light, dear. They're afraid of what they don't understand." Then I remembered something else. Something I'd overheard 2 weeks earlier when I'd walked past the study while visiting the Preston family home. Vanessa's voice, sharp and clear. "Mother, You can't seriously expect us to treat her like family. She's basically the help with a wedding ring. And Elizabeth's response, just be civil. Jonathan will come to his senses eventually. I hadn't told Jonathan about that conversation. Some part of me had still been protecting him from the truth about his family. But sitting here now, staring at that photo, something inside me shifted. A quiet resolve settled in my bones. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I walked to our closet and pulled out an outfit I'd been saving for a special occasion, a tailored cream suit with subtle gold threading that complemented my olive skin. Not flashy, not attention-seeking, but undeniably elegant. I styled my dark hair in a sleek low bun, applied minimal makeup, and chose my grandmother's simple pearl earrings, the ones she'd managed to bring with her when she fled Beirut decades ago. I wasn't going to confront them with anger. I would do something far more devastating. I would show them exactly who they'd been dismissing all this time. I called a car service. Not an Uber, but the private company my family had used for generations. As I watched Brooklyn slide by through the window, I thought about how little the Prestons actually knew about me. They'd created a narrative based on assumptions and prejudices, and I'd allowed it because I thought love meant accommodation. The drive to Westchester took just under an hour. As we approached Ashton Manor, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the one that always appeared when I entered Preston territory. But today, it felt different. Less like anxiety and more like anticipation. The car pulled up to the imposing entrance. Ashton Manor stood like a fortress of old money and exclusivity, its stone facade and manicured gardens designed to intimidate those who didn't belong. I'd always found it cold, despite its objectively beautiful architecture. I stepped out of the car and straightened my jacket. The doorman nodded politely. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm here to join the Preston party," I said, my voice calm and assured. He checked his tablet, frowning slightly. "I'm sorry, but I don't see any additional guests expected for that reservation." "That's all right," I smiled. "They're my in-laws." "I'm sure it's just an oversight." Doubt flickered across his face. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing the risk of offending a potential member against the strict protocols of Ashton Manor. "One moment, please." He stepped away to make a call. While waiting, I gazed around the entrance hall. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over marble floors. Fresh flower arrangements perfumed the air. A piano played softly somewhere out of sight, the very definition of refined luxury. The doorman returned, his expression professionally neutral. "Mrs. Preston says they aren't expecting any additional guests this evening." "Which Mrs. Preston did you speak with?" I asked, though I already knew. "Mrs. Elizabeth Preston." I nodded. "I understand. Would you please let Edmund know that Leila Curry is here?" The doorman's eyebrows rose slightly at my use of the club manager's first name, but he nodded and disappeared again. I stood there, perfectly still, aware of the curious glances from staff and members passing through the foyer. I didn't fidget. I didn't check my phone. I simply waited with the quiet confidence of someone who knew they belonged, even when others insisted they didn't. A minute later, Elizabeth appeared in the doorway to the main dining room, her expression a careful mask of polite confusion. She wore a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her silver hair arranged in an immaculate updo. "Leila," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of surprise. "What are you doing here, dear?" Before I could answer, I caught sight of Jonathan behind her, his expression a mix of confusion and guilt. Vanessa and Camilla peered around him, identical looks of displeasure on their perfectly made-up faces. "I saw the family photo," I said simply. "I thought I'd join you." Elizabeth's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. "Oh, darling, this was just a small impromptu gathering. Nothing formal." 12 people is hardly small," I replied, keeping my tone light. "And the private dining room suggests it was planned in advance." A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "We simply didn't think you'd be interested. You always seem so uncomfortable at these functions." I felt Jonathan approach before I saw him. "Leila, I was going to tell you about this later." It really was last minute. I turned to him. The reservation for the private dining room at Ashton Manor was made 3 weeks ago. I checked. His face fell. I knew he was lying. Well, Elizabeth interjected smoothly, regardless, we're actually finished with dinner. We were just about to leave. That's not true, Mother, came a small voice from behind them. Olivia, my 8-year-old niece, squeezed past the adults. Dessert hasn't even come yet. Elizabeth's smile tightened. Olivia, darling, adults are speaking. But Olivia had already reached me, her small hand slipping into mine. Aunt Leila, why weren't you at dinner? I saved you a seat next to me, but then Uncle Richard said you weren't coming. The innocence of her question hung in the air like a spotlight on the family's deception. I must have missed my invitation, I said gently. There wasn't one, Olivia said with a child's brutal honesty. Grandma said you were probably busy cleaning or something. A sharp intake of breath from Vanessa. Richard suddenly became very interested in his watch. Did she now? I kept my voice level, despite the anger building inside me. Elizabeth stepped forward, placing a hand on Olivia's shoulder to pull her back. Children misunderstand things, she said dismissively. Now, as I was saying, we're actually… Mrs. Curry Preston. The voice came from behind me, warm and genuinely pleased. I turned to see Edmund Wells, the longtime manager of Ashton Manor, approaching with a broad smile. At 60-something, with silver hair and impeccable posture, he embodied the perfect balance of professionalism and warmth that had made him legendary in hospitality circles. What a delightful surprise, he continued, taking my hand in both of his. Had I known you were joining us tonight, I would have prepared your usual table. I could feel the confusion radiating from the Preston family behind me. It was a last-minute decision, I explained. I saw that my family was dining here and thought I'd join them. Edmund glanced over my shoulder, his expression cooling slightly as he nodded to Elizabeth and Richard. Mrs. Preston. Mr. Preston. Elizabeth stepped forward. Edmund, we were just explaining to Leila that we're actually finished with dinner. Nonsense, Edmund interrupted smoothly. I've just been informed that your dessert course is being prepared, and we would never turn away, Miss Curry. He turned to me with a genuine smile. Or should I say, Miss Curry Preston now? The way he emphasized my family name didn't escape anyone's notice. Leila is fine, Edmund, I said warmly. He nodded. Of course. Now shall we get you settled with your family? I believe we can easily adjust the seating. Elizabeth's mouth opened, then closed. For perhaps the first time since I'd known her, she seemed at a loss for words. Edmund led the way back to the private dining room, with Olivia still holding my hand. As we walked, I caught snippets of whispered conversation behind us. Why is he treating her like that? Did you know she was on a first-name basis with the manager? Mother. What is going on? The private dining room was everything you'd expect from a place like Ashton Manor. Coffered ceilings, wood-paneled walls, a massive table that could seat 20 with room to spare. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, creating prisms on the crisp, white tablecloth. Edmund personally pulled out a chair for me, placing me between Olivia and Jonathan's cousin Michael, who seemed to be the only one genuinely pleased to see me. Your usual Darjeeling tea, Leila? Edmund asked. That would be lovely, thank you. As he walked away, I could feel the weight of the family's stares. Elizabeth and Richard exchanged glances from the head of the table. Vanessa leaned over to whisper something to her husband. Camilla studied me with narrowed eyes. Jonathan took his seat across from me, his expression a complex mix of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. Well, Richard finally broke the silence, his voice carrying the forced joviality he reserved for uncomfortable situations. This is a pleasant surprise. Is it? I asked mildly. Before he could respond, the waitstaff arrived with dessert, an elaborate chocolate creation with gold leaf accents. My tea appeared moments later, served in the antique bone china Ashton Manor reserved for its most valued patrons. Edmund seems to know you quite well, Elizabeth observed, her tone suggesting this was somehow improper. I took a sip of my tea before responding. Yes, we've known each other for years. From where, exactly? Vanessa asked. not bothering to hide her skepticism. I set my cup down carefully. My family has been coming here for a long time. Richard scoffed lightly. Ashton Manor has a very selective membership. It's quite exclusive. I'm aware, I said simply. Jonathan cleared his throat. Leila's family is comfortable, he offered awkwardly. I looked at my husband, wondering if he truly believed that weak description, or if he'd been deliberately downplaying my background to his family all along. Comfortable enough to know Edmund by his first name? Camilla asked with a raised eyebrow. Elizabeth cut a small piece of her dessert. Perhaps Leila worked here at some point. That would explain the familiarity. The implication hung in the air. In their minds, the only way someone like me could know the staff was by being one of them. I felt a small hand squeeze mine under the table. Olivia was watching me with wide eyes, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. I smiled at her reassuringly before addressing the table. Actually, I've never worked here. Then how? Vanessa began. She was interrupted by the appearance of an older man in an immaculate suit. Charles Thompson, the head butler of Ashton Manor for over 2 decades, stood at attention near the entrance. Pardon the interruption, he said, his British accent crisp and proper. Mr. Wells thought you might like to know that everything has been arranged for next month's event, Ms. Curry. Every head at the table turned toward me. Thank you, Charles, I replied. Please tell Edmund I appreciate his attention to detail as always. Charles nodded, then did something that caused several gasps around the table. He bowed slightly. Of course, madam. Your family has always been our priority. As he left, the silence in the room was absolute. Elizabeth was the first to recover. I don't understand, she said, her voice tight. What event is he referring to? I took another sip of my tea, allowing the moment to stretch. 3 years of dismissal and condescension. 3 years of being treated like an accessory. Or, worse, the help. 3 years of watching my husband make excuses for his family's behavior. The annual Curie Foundation Gala, I finally replied. It's been held here for the past 37 years. Richard's brow furrowed. The Curie Foundation. The one that funds the new wing at Presbyterian? And the scholarship program at Columbia, I added. Among other things. Jonathan stared at me, his expression unreadable. Leila, you never told them? You never asked, I said simply. Vanessa's husband leaned forward. Wait, are you related to Samir Khoury, the developer? He's my father, I confirmed. The shock that rippled through the table would have been comical under different circumstances. Samir Khoury was not just a developer. He was one of the most successful real estate magnates on the East Coast, known for both his business acumen and his philanthropic endeavors. Elizabeth's hand trembled slightly as she set down her fork. But Jonathan said your family was in imports. I looked at my husband, who had the grace to look embarrassed. My family's primary business is real estate development, but yes, we do have interests in international trade as well. Why didn't you tell us? Richard demanded, turning to Jonathan. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. I did tell you. Leila's family was successful. You never seemed interested in the details. Successful is not the same as... Elizabeth trailed off, apparently unable to find words adequate to describe the revelation. Camilla was typing frantically on her phone under the table, no doubt searching for information about my family. Oh my God, she whispered, looking up with wide eyes. The Curries are on the Forbes list. I finished my tea and placed the cup gently back in its saucer. My background never seemed relevant to any of you before. You were quite content to assume I was... What was the phrase? The help with a wedding ring? Vanessa paled. You heard that? I did. Elizabeth straightened her shoulders. Well, this is certainly illuminating. But I don't understand why you wouldn't have mentioned something so significant. I met her gaze steadily. When exactly should I have mentioned it, Elizabeth? When you were explaining how to properly fold napkins as if I'd never seen fine dining. Or perhaps when you suggested I might be more comfortable helping in the kitchen during last Thanksgiving. Richard cleared his throat. Now, Leila, there's no need to be dramatic. We've always treated you as part of the family. Have you? I asked quietly. You've treated me as an inconvenience at best, a servant at worst. Not once in 3 years has anyone at this table, except Olivia, asked me about my family, my education, my work. You decided who I was the moment you saw me, and nothing I could have said would have changed that perception. The silence that followed was deafening. Is this why Edmund and the staff treat you differently? Camilla finally asked. I shook my head. They treat me with respect, because I've always treated them with respect. Their deference has nothing to do with my family name and everything to do with basic human dignity, something that seems to be in short supply at this table. Jonathan reached across the table for my hand. Leila, I never meant to. I withdrew my hand gently. We'll discuss this later. Edmund appeared at the doorway. Ms. Corey, your car has arrived whenever you're ready. And your father called to confirm tomorrow's board meeting here at 9. Thank you, Edmund, I said, rising from my chair. I think I'll be leaving now. Elizabeth stood quickly. Leila, surely there's no need to rush off. We should take this opportunity to get to know each other better. Her smile was strained, her eyes calculating. I could almost see the social connections and business opportunities flashing through her mind. I think we know each other quite well already, I replied. I turned to Olivia and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. I'll see you on Saturday for our museum date, yes? She nodded enthusiastically. Can we still get ice cream after? Absolutely. I looked around the table one last time, taking in the shock, embarrassment, and sudden reassessment in their eyes. For 3 years I had been invisible to them. Now, suddenly, I was all they could see. Jonathan, I said quietly, I'll see you at home. As I walked out of the dining room, I heard the rapid-fire whispers erupt behind me. Questions, accusations, damage control. The carefully constructed hierarchy of the Preston family had just been upended, and they were scrambling to reorient themselves. Edmund walked me to the entrance, his usual professional demeanor softened by genuine concern. Are you all right, Leila? He asked when we were out of earshot. I smiled. I'm fine, Edmund. Long overdue, but fine. He nodded. Your father would be proud. He never did tolerate pretension. No, he doesn't, I agreed. Thank you for your help tonight. It was my pleasure. Some lessons are necessary, however uncomfortable. As my car pulled away from Ashton Manor, I didn't feel the vindication I'd expected. Instead, I felt something lighter, cleaner, like I'd finally set down a heavy weight I'd been carrying for too long. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. I'm so sorry. We need to talk. Yes, we did. About why he'd allowed his family to treat me that way. About why he'd never corrected their assumptions. About whether our marriage could survive this revelation. But those conversations would come later. For now, I leaned back against the leather seat and watched the manicured grounds of Ashton Manor recede in the distance. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe fully in the presence of the Preston family. Not because they now knew who I was, but because I had finally stopped letting them define me. The car turned onto the main road, and I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted but strangely peaceful. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, I had reclaimed something essential. Not my status or my family name, but my dignity. And that was worth more than all the family dinners in the world. My car pulled into our Brooklyn brownstones driveway just after 10. The lights were off. Jonathan hadn't made it home yet. I was grateful for the solitude as I climbed the steps to our front door, my mind still processing the events of the evening. The weight of 3 years of silent humiliation had lifted, replaced by something unfamiliar, a lightness that felt almost dangerous. Inside, I kicked off my heels and moved through the darkness to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window overlooking our small garden. The moonlight cast silver shadows across the herbs I'd planted last spring. Rosemary, mint, and thyme, reminiscent of my grandmother's garden in Beirut. I'd told Elizabeth about that garden once, about how my grandmother had maintained it through years of civil war. how the act of growing things had been her form of resistance against chaos. Elizabeth had smiled politely and changed the subject to her landscape designer's latest work at their Southampton estate. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Jonathan. On my way home, please wait up. I didn't respond. Instead, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom and began the careful ritual of removing my armor, the elegant suit, the perfectly applied makeup, the sleek hairstyle. I changed into silk pajamas and washed my face, watching my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman who stared back looked the same as she had this morning. Yet something fundamental had shifted. For 3 years, I'd made myself smaller to fit into the Preston family's narrow definition of what I should be. I'd swallowed corrections about my accent, nodded through explanations of customs I'd known since childhood, accepted backhanded compliments about how articulate I was. I'd done it because I thought love meant accommodation, that if I just tried hard enough, they would eventually see me. Tonight had proven that they'd never wanted to see me at all. They'd preferred their version. The immigrant girl who'd somehow ensnared their son, the charity case they tolerated at family gatherings, the help with a wedding ring. I heard the front door open and close downstairs. Jonathan's footsteps, hesitant and heavy, moved through the house. He called my name softly. I'm upstairs, I replied. When he appeared in the doorway, he looked like he'd aged 5 years in a few hours. His tie was loose, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. A nervous habit I'd once found endearing. Leila, he started, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. I sat on the edge of our bed, waiting. After 3 years of filling uncomfortable silences, I was done making things easier for the Preston family, and that included my husband. I don't even know where to begin, he finally said, loosening his tie further. What happened tonight? What happened tonight was the inevitable result of 3 years of lies and omissions, I said calmly. He winced. I never lied about you. Didn't you? When your mother asked if my family was comfortable, and you agreed instead of telling her the truth, what would you call that? Jonathan sank into the armchair across from me. It wasn't like that. When we first met, when I first brought you home, I tried to tell them about your family. They weren't interested. They'd already decided who you were based on your name, your accent, where we met. So you stopped trying, I stated flatly. No, he protested, then sighed. Yes, maybe. I don't know. It became easier to let them think what they wanted. Easier for whom, Jonathan? He had no answer for that. Do you know what it's like, I continued, to sit at a table and be treated like you're invisible? To have your education, your achievements, your very existence dismissed as irrelevant? They're snobs, Leila. They always have been. This isn't about snobbery. It's about respect, basic human dignity. They respect you now, he offered weakly. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. No, they fear social embarrassment now. They're calculating what connections they might gain, what doors my family name might open. That's not respect. That's opportunism. Jonathan stood and paced the room. What do you want me to say? That I should have defended you more? That I should have corrected them every time they made an assumption? You're right. I should have. Why didn't you? He stopped pacing, his back to me. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet, I almost missed it, because sometimes it was easier to let them be wrong about you than to admit how wrong they've always been about me. I felt something shift in the air between us. What do you mean? He turned to face me, and I was startled to see tears in his eyes. Do you know why I was at a public defender's office when we met? Why I was working pro bono cases instead of at my father's firm? I'd always assumed it was idealism, a phase of wanting to help before inevitably joining the family business. I'd admired him for it. Because I failed the bar exam, he said flatly. Twice. The great Preston heir, Harvard law graduate, couldn't pass the bar. My family pulled strings to keep it quiet, arranged for me to do charitable work until I could try again. They told everyone it was my choice, that I was showing initiative, building experience before joining the firm. I stared at him, pieces falling into place. You never told me. How could I? You were this brilliant woman who'd graduated top of your class, who spoke 4 languages, who'd helped negotiate international deals for your family's company before you were 25. And I was a disappointment. Jonathan. No, let me finish. When we met, when we fell in love, it was the first time in my life I felt like someone valued me for myself, not for my family name or my potential connections. You never asked about my family's status or expected me to be anything other than who I was. He sat down heavily on the bed beside me, and then I brought you home, and I watched them do to you exactly what they'd always done to me. Measure you against some impossible standard and find you wanting. But instead of standing up for you, I was relieved. Relieved? The word felt like a slap. Because for once they were focused on someone else's failures. Real or imagined. He ran a hand over his face. God, that sounds horrible. It was horrible. I knew it was happening, and I let it continue because it took the pressure off me. The silence that followed was thick with revelation. In some twisted way, I could almost understand it. The crushing weight of expectation, the constant fear of disappointing people who measured worth by pedigree and performance. Did you pass the bar? I asked finally. He nodded. 6 months ago, on my 4th attempt. Why didn't you tell me you were still trying? The same reason I never corrected my family about yours. Shame. He looked down at his hands. I was ashamed of failing. Ashamed of letting them make you feel small. Ashamed of being relieved when they did. I moved to the window, needing space to process. Outside, the city continued its nighttime rhythm. Taxi lights, distant sirens, the occasional burst of laughter from pedestrians. Lives unfolding, unconcerned with our private drama. When Edmund called you Ms. Curry tonight, when Charles bowed to you, the look on my mother's face, Jonathan said softly. For the first time in my life, I saw her completely speechless. It wasn't about the money, Jonathan. It was never about that. I know. It was about being seen. I turned back to him. Yes, that's exactly what it was about. He stood and approached me cautiously, like I might disappear if he moved too quickly. I've been a coward, Leila. With them, with you. I'm so sorry. In his eyes, I saw genuine remorse, but also something else. Fear. Not of his family's reaction or social embarrassment, but of losing me. It struck me then that despite everything, despite his failures and omissions, I still loved this man. The question was whether love was enough to rebuild what had been broken. I don't know where we go from here, I admitted. He nodded, accepting the uncertainty. Whatever you decide, whatever you need, I'll respect it. But I want you to know that I'm done letting anyone make you feel invisible, including me. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen and felt a surge of both amusement and irritation. A text from Elizabeth. We should have lunch this week, just us girls. So much to catch up on. I showed it to Jonathan, who let out a short, incredulous laugh. Unbelievable. Actually, it's entirely believable, I said, setting the phone aside. And predictable. He sat on the edge of the bed again, looking exhausted. What will you do? About your mother? Nothing. She'll call, she'll text, she'll probably send flowers. I'll be polite, but distant. And about us? I sat beside him, close, but not touching. That depends on you, Jonathan. Not on promises or apologies, but actions. I need to know that you see me, really see me, and that you're willing to stand with me, even when it's uncomfortable. He nodded slowly. I want that too, more than anything. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of revelation and possibility hanging between us. Finally, I reached for his hand. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. It's late, I said. We should get some sleep. As we prepared for bed, moving around each other in the familiar dance of marriage, I thought about the evening's revelations. Not just about my in-laws, but about my husband. about the complex web of insecurity, expectation, and fear that had shaped our relationship without my knowledge. We slipped under the covers, the distance between us both physical and emotional. Just as I was drifting off, Jonathan spoke into the darkness. "Leila?" "Yes? Thank you for not giving up on me yet." I didn't respond immediately. The truth was, I wasn't sure if our marriage could survive this breach of trust. But as I lay there in the dark, I thought about second chances and the courage it takes to confront one's own failures. "Get some sleep, Jonathan," I said finally. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." The next morning, I woke before dawn. Years of early meetings and international calls had trained my body to function on minimal sleep. I slipped out of bed, leaving Jonathan still sleeping, and made my way downstairs. I brewed coffee and sat at our kitchen island, opening my laptop to check emails. The familiar routine was comforting after the emotional turbulence of the previous night. As CEO of the Curie Foundation, I had responsibilities that wouldn't wait for personal dramas to resolve. An hour later, Jonathan appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, eyes wary. "You're up early." "Board meeting at 9, I reminded him, gesturing to the coffee pot. "There's fresh coffee." He poured himself a cup and joined me at the island, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "At Ashton Manor." "Yes. With your father." I nodded, typing a response to an urgent email from our London office. "Leila, about last night. We don't need to rehash everything this morning," I said, closing my laptop. "We both have work to do." "I know, but—" He was interrupted by the chime of the doorbell. We exchanged confused glances. It was barely 7 a.m. Jonathan went to answer it while I remained at the island, sipping my coffee. A moment later, he returned with a massive arrangement of white orchids, Elizabeth's signature apology flower. "Let me guess," I said dryly. "From your mother?" He checked the card and nodded, his expression a mix of embarrassment and resignation. "She wants to have us over for dinner this weekend. All of us, including your parents." I couldn't help but laugh. "Of course she does." "You don't have to go," he said quickly. "I can make an excuse." "No more excuses, Jonathan. No more hiding." I stood and gathered my things. "I need to get ready for my meeting." As I headed upstairs, he called after me. "What should I tell her about dinner?" I paused on the stairs. "Tell her the truth, that we'll need to check our schedule. And Jonathan, make sure she understands that my parents won't be summoned like supporting characters in her social drama. If she wants to meet them, she can wait until the foundation gala next month. Like everyone else." He smiled. A real smile, perhaps the first since last night's revelations. "I'll tell her exactly that." An hour later, I was dressed in a tailored burgundy suit, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, makeup minimal but precise. Professional, confident, unmistakably myself. As I gathered my portfolio and phone, I caught Jonathan watching me from the bedroom doorway. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," he said softly. "Just, you're remarkable, Leila. I should have told you that every day for the past 3 years." The compliment warmed me, but I kept my expression neutral. "Are you coming to Ashton Manor today?" My tone was casual, but we both knew it wasn't a simple question. He straightened, understanding the weight of the moment. "If you want me there, yes. I think it's time my father met my husband, the real one, not the Preston heir." Relief flooded his face. "I'd like that." The drive to Westchester was quieter than the night before, but less tense. Jonathan sat beside me in the back of the car, reviewing notes for a case on his tablet. Occasionally, he'd ask my opinion on a legal point, something he'd rarely done before. Small changes, but significant ones. As we approached Ashton Manor, I felt him tense beside me. "Nervous?" I asked. "Terrified," he admitted. "Your father is something of a legend in business circles. He's also the man who taught me to make baklava and who cries at Disney movies," I reminded him. "He's human, Jonathan. Just like you." The car pulled up to the entrance. Unlike last night, the staff were prepared for our arrival. Charles himself opened my door, bowing slightly. "Good morning, Ms. Corey. Mr. Preston. The board is gathering in the East Conference Room." "Thank you, Charles," I said warmly. "How's Eliza's college applications coming along?" The older man's formal demeanor softened. "Very well, ma'am. She's been accepted to 3 schools already, thanks in part to the Foundation's scholarship program." "Wonderful. Tell her I'd love to hear which one she chooses." As we walked through the lobby, I was acutely aware of the difference in how the staff greeted me compared to last night. Not because they now knew who I was, they had always known, but because I was no longer hiding who I was. We passed the main dining room where last night's drama had unfolded. The tables were being set for breakfast, crystal and silver gleaming in the morning light. A young server noticed me and straightened, nodding respectfully. Jonathan leaned close to my ear. "Have they always treated you like this here?" "Yes," I said simply, "because I've always treated them with respect." As we approached the conference room, I saw my father through the glass doors. At 62, Samir Khoury remained an imposing figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the same olive skin and dark eyes I'd inherited. He was in animated conversation with Edmund and several board members, his hands moving expressively as he made a point. "Leila," he called when he spotted me, breaking away from the group to meet us at the door. He embraced me warmly, kissing both cheeks. "Right on time, as always." "Good morning, Baba," I replied in Arabic, the childhood term of endearment slipping out naturally. His eyes moved to Jonathan, curious, but not unwelcoming. And this must be the husband I've heard so much about but somehow never met. I made the introduction in English. "Baba, this is Jonathan Preston." "Jonathan. My father, Samir Khoury." The 2 men shook hands, my father's grip firm and evaluating. "It's an honor to meet you, sir," Jonathan said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "Is it?" my father asked, his tone light but his gaze sharp. 3 years is a long time to honor someone without meeting them. I placed a hand on my father's arm. "Baba, please." He softened immediately. "Forgive an old man's directness. Come, both of you." "Coffee before we begin?" As we entered the conference room, I watched Jonathan take in the gathering. Board members, many of whom were leaders in their fields, greeted me with familiar warmth. Several spoke to me in Arabic or French, asking about my mother or commenting on recent foundation projects. Jonathan stayed close by my side, observant but not withdrawing. When introductions were made, he engaged thoughtfully, asking questions that showed genuine interest, rather than networking calculation. I found myself impressed by his resilience, facing this unexpected world that had been adjacent to his life for 3 years, hidden in plain sight. During a brief lull before the meeting officially began, my father drew me aside. "So," he said in Arabic, "last night was interesting." I raised an eyebrow. "You heard already?" "Edmund called me this morning. He thought I should know." He glanced over at Jonathan, who was in conversation with our education director. "Your mother-in-law also called. Very early. Very enthusiastic about connecting our families." I couldn't help but smile at his dry tone. I'm sure she was. I told her we'd be delighted to meet at the gala. As patrons, of course. Of course. He studied my face with the careful attention he'd always given me, from childhood drawings to business proposals. "Are you all right, Habibdi?" "I'm better than I've been in a long time," I answered truthfully. "And him?" He nodded toward Jonathan. I considered the question. "He's learning. We both are." My father nodded, accepting this. "Your mother and I wondered why you kept us separate from your husband's family. Now I understand." "I thought I was protecting everyone," I admitted. "In reality, I was just enabling patterns that needed to be broken." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You know what my father used to say? Sometimes the kindest thing is to let people face the truth of their actions," I finished for him. It had been my grandfather's favorite saying, repeated through generations of our family. The meeting was called to order, and we took our seats around the large table. As chief executive of the foundation, I led the discussion on our upcoming initiatives, educational scholarships, healthcare access programs, and cultural preservation projects. Jonathan listened attentively, occasionally taking notes. When we broke for a mid-morning recess, Edmund approached with a message. "Miss Curry, Mrs. Preston has called 3 times this morning. She's quite insistent about speaking with you." I exchanged a look with Jonathan, who seemed torn between embarrassment and resignation. "Please tell her I'm in meetings all day," I said calmly. "I'll return her call when my schedule permits." Edmund nodded, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Of course, Ms. Curry." As he walked away, Jonathan moved closer. "You're enjoying this a little, aren't you?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Perhaps a little. 3 years of being treated like an afterthought earns me at least a day of making her wait, don't you think?" He didn't argue. Instead, he surprised me by taking my hand publicly. A simple gesture of solidarity that felt more significant than any grand declaration. "I think," he said quietly, "that I'm finally beginning to see what I've been missing all this time." In his eyes, I saw something new, not just remorse or attraction, but genuine appreciation. For the first time since we'd met, Jonathan was seeing me wholly, without the distorting lens of his family's prejudice or his own insecurities. And in that moment, standing in the place where my invisibility had been most painfully reinforced just hours before, I felt something unexpected begin to take root. Hope that, perhaps, out of last night's painful revelations, something stronger and more authentic might grow. The meeting resumed, and as I returned to my role as Foundation CEO, I carried that hope with me. Cautious but real, like a small flame that, with proper care, might illuminate a new path forward. The week following the Ashton Manor revelation passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and carefully worded text messages. Elizabeth Preston had moved from shock to strategic pursuit with remarkable speed. The flower deliveries continued daily, orchids, lilies, exotic arrangements that arrived with handwritten notes expressing her deepest regrets for any misunderstandings and her sincere desire to properly welcome me into the family. I instructed our doorman to donate them to the Children's Hospital in Brooklyn. By Friday afternoon, I was in my office at the Corey Foundation headquarters in Manhattan, reviewing grant proposals when my assistant Nadia knocked on my door. "Mrs. Preston is here to see you," she said, her expression perfectly neutral though her eyes held a question. I looked up from my computer. "Elizabeth Preston? Here?" "Yes, she doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite—" Nadia searched for a diplomatic word, persistent. I leaned back in my chair, considering my options. Part of me wanted to send Elizabeth away, to let her experience even a fraction of the dismissal I'd endured. But that would be petty, and pettiness had never been my style. "Send her in, please. And Nadia? Hold my calls for the next 30 minutes. "Of course." She hesitated at the door. "Would you like me to stay nearby, in case you need anything?" I smiled at her concern. "I'll be fine. But thank you." A moment later, Elizabeth Preston swept into my office like she was entering a ballroom. She wore a tailored cream suit, not unlike the one I'd worn to Ashton Manor, her silver hair arranged in an elegant updo, pearls gleaming at her throat and ears. She carried a small gift bag from Tiffany's. "Leila, darling," she exclaimed, as if we were the dearest of friends. "Thank you so much for seeing me without an appointment. I know how busy you must be." I rose from my desk, extending my hand professionally. "Elizabeth, this is unexpected." She ignored my hand and moved in for air kisses near both cheeks, a gesture she had never once attempted in the 3 years I'd been married to her son. "I simply couldn't wait any longer to speak with you," she said, settling gracefully into one of the chairs across from my desk. "You've been so difficult to reach this week." I resumed my seat. "As I mentioned in my message, the Foundation is preparing for our annual gala. It's a busy time." "Yes, of course, the gala." Her eyes brightened. "That's partly why I'm here." I waited, saying nothing. Elizabeth had always filled silences with nervous chatter, uncomfortable with conversational pauses. I'd learned this early in our relationship but had never used it to my advantage, until now. True to form, she continued quickly. Richard and I would be honored to contribute to the Foundation's work. We've always been passionate about philanthropy. How generous, I said neutrally. The Foundation accepts donations through our website. She blinked, clearly expecting more enthusiasm. Well, I was thinking of something more substantial. A named endowment, perhaps? The Preston Family Educational Initiative has a nice ring to it, don't you think? I studied her for a moment. Elizabeth, why are you here? To make amends, of course, she said, her smile fixed but her eyes calculating. And to better understand my daughter-in-law. I realize now that we got off on the wrong foot. The wrong foot, I repeated. Is that what you call 3 years of condescension and exclusion? Her smile faltered slightly. Perhaps I was too quick to judge. We all have our blind spots, don't we? Some blind spots are chosen, Elizabeth. She had the grace to look momentarily abashed before rallying. Well, that's in the past now. I'm here to look forward. She reached into the Tiffany bag and withdrew a small blue box. A peace offering. She slid it across the desk. I made no move to take it. Elizabeth, I appreciate the gesture, but jewelry won't fix what's broken between us. It's not just jewelry, she insisted. It belonged to Jonathan's grandmother. She always wanted her grandson's wife to have it. This gave me pause. Jonathan's grandmother had been the only member of the Preston family who had shown me genuine warmth. Before she passed, she had pressed my hand and told me to stay strong against the tide. I had assumed she meant the general challenges of marriage, but perhaps she had known exactly what I would face with her family. I opened the box carefully. Inside was an antique diamond and sapphire ring, elegantly understated in a way Elizabeth's usual choices were not. She left it specifically for you, Elizabeth continued. Not for Jonathan's wife, but for Leila. By name. Quote. I looked up sharply. She knew who I was. Elizabeth nodded, something like respect flickering briefly in her eyes. Mother was on the board of Presbyterian Hospital for 40 years. The Curry Pediatric Wing was dedicated during her tenure. Of course she knew. And she never told you? She tried, in her way. We didn't listen. Elizabeth smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. Mother always did enjoy her little lessons in humility. I closed the ring box gently and set it aside. Thank you for bringing this. It means a great deal. Elizabeth seemed to take this as encouragement. She leaned forward eagerly. Now, about the gala. Richard and I would love to host a pre-event reception at our home. Nothing too extravagant, just close family and key donors. It would be the perfect opportunity to properly introduce you to our circle. I couldn't help but marvel at her ability to pivot from apology to social engineering in the space of a breath. The Foundation already has a full schedule of events surrounding the gala. But surely you could make room for family, she pressed. Elizabeth, I said, my voice firm but not unkind. I understand what you're trying to do. But our relationship can't be fixed with grand gestures or strategic introductions. Then what would fix it? She asked, an edge of frustration breaking through her polished veneer. Time, respect, genuine interest in who I am, rather than what I can offer your social standing. I met her gaze directly. I don't need your connections or your endorsement. I never did. She sat back, studying me with new eyes. You're not at all what I expected. I never was, you just refused to see it. A knock at the door interrupted us. Nadia poked her head in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but your 3 o'clock is here, and your father is on line 1. Thank you, Nadia. Tell them I'll be right with them. I turned back to Elizabeth. I'm afraid I need to get back to work. She rose gracefully, gathering her purse. Of course. We can continue this conversation at dinner. Jonathan mentioned you might be free this weekend. Jonathan was mistaken, I replied smoothly. We have prior commitments. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I see. Well, we'll find a time that works. Family should be a priority after all. I couldn't agree more, I said, standing to walk her to the door. Which is why I've committed to spending more time with my parents. They've missed me these past 3 years. It was a gentle rebuke, but it landed. Elizabeth's expression flickered with something that might have been shame before she recovered her social mask. They must be proud of what you've built here, she said, gesturing to the office. They're proud of who I am, I corrected. The work is secondary. At the door, she paused. Leila, I know we've gotten off to a difficult start, but I hope you'll give me, a chance to do better. For the first time since she'd arrived, I sensed genuine emotion beneath the performance. Perhaps not remorse, exactly, but at least awareness that something valuable had been damaged by her actions. I'm not closing any doors, Elizabeth, I said quietly, but I'm not rushing through them either. We have time to find our way to a better relationship, if that's truly what you want. She nodded, accepting this boundary with surprising grace. Until the gala, then. Until the gala. After she left, I returned to my desk and picked up the ring box, opening it again to study Jonathan's grandmother's gift. The stones caught the afternoon light, sending blue and white reflections dancing across the ceiling. There was a message here, a connection across time from a woman who had seen me clearly even when others refused to. I slipped the ring onto my right hand, where it settled as if it had been made for me. Then I picked up the phone to return my father's call, feeling somehow both lighter and more grounded than before. That evening, I arrived home to find Jonathan in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, utterly absorbed in preparing dinner. The scene was so unexpected that I paused in the doorway, taking in the chaos of ingredients spread across our usually pristine counters. He looked up and grinned, a smudge of flour on his cheek. You're home early. And you're cooking? In the 3 years of our marriage, Jonathan had rarely ventured beyond making coffee. The Preston household had always employed a chef, and Jonathan had never shown interest in learning culinary skills. Trying to, at least, he admitted, gesturing to an open laptop displaying a recipe. Your mother sent me instructions, but I think something may have been lost in translation. I set down my bag and moved closer, peering at the screen. You called my mother? He nodded, returning his attention to chopping herbs with careful, if inexpert, precision. I asked her to teach me how to make your favorite dish, the one your grandmother used to make. Kibe? I was genuinely surprised. That's complicated. So I'm discovering. He indicated a bowl of bulgur wheat soaking in water. This is supposed to be draining now, but the consistency seems wrong. I washed my hands and stepped beside him, our shoulders touching as I examined his work. You need to press it more firmly. Here, like this. I demonstrated, feeling a strange tenderness at his earnest effort. Your mother laughed when I told her what I was attempting, he admitted. She said I should start with something simpler, but I wanted... He trailed off, focusing intently on the task. Wanted what? I prompted gently. He looked up, his expression open and vulnerable in a way I'd rarely seen. I wanted to bring something of your world into our home, something that mattered to you. The simple honesty of it caught me off guard. In our early courtship, Jonathan had been curious about my Lebanese heritage, eager to learn about the foods, music, and traditions that had shaped me. Somewhere along the way, perhaps when we entered the orbit of his family, that curiosity had faded, replaced by an unspoken expectation that I would adapt to the Preston way of life. I've been thinking about what you said, he continued, returning to his chopping, about being seen, about how I made you feel invisible. I realized that I'd stopped asking questions about your life before me, about the things that made you who you are. I reached for a kitchen towel to dry my hands, needing a moment to collect myself. My mother actually shared the recipe with you? He laughed. After thoroughly interrogating me about my intentions. She's formidable. She had to be, I said, thinking of my mother's journey from war-torn Beirut to the highest circles of New York society. Immigrants don't get second chances to make impressions. Jonathan's hands stilled. I never thought about it that way. You never had to. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. He nodded, acknowledging this truth. I'm learning. Slowly, maybe, but I'm trying. We worked side by side for the next hour, preparing a meal that had been the centerpiece of my childhood family gatherings. The familiar scents of mint, lamb, and pine nuts filled our kitchen, transforming the space in subtle but significant ways. Jonathan listened attentively as I explained techniques my grandmother had taught me, asking questions about traditions and memories associated with the dish. It wasn't perfect. The kibbeh turned out lopsided, the bulgur a bit too wet, but the effort itself felt like a bridge being carefully reconstructed between us. As we sat down to eat, Jonathan noticed the ring on my right hand. Is that my grandmother's? My mother mentioned she was bringing it to you. Yes, I confirmed. She came to my office today. He winced slightly. I tried to talk her out of ambushing you at work. It's all right. It was actually an educational conversation. How so? I took a sip of wine, considering how to explain. Your grandmother knew who I was all along. She knew about my family, about the foundation. Jonathan seemed genuinely surprised. She never said anything. I think she was waiting for all of you to figure it out on your own. I twisted the ring gently on my finger. She left this specifically for me. Not for your future wife, but for me. By name. That sounds like her, he said softly. She always did prefer teaching lessons over giving answers. We ate in companionable silence for a while, the evening light softening around us. Outside our window, Brooklyn was coming alive with its nighttime energy. Restaurant patios filling with diners, neighbors walking dogs, the distant sound of music from the park down the street. My mother wants us to have dinner with them this weekend, Jonathan said eventually. I know. I told her we have other plans. He raised an eyebrow. Do we? I set down my fork. Yes. We're having dinner with my parents tomorrow night, and on Sunday, we're taking Olivia to the museum as promised. I'd like that, he said, surprising me again. In the past, Jonathan had always seemed slightly uncomfortable around my parents, as if unsure of his place in a family dynamic so different from his own. You would? He reached across the table for my hand. Leila, I've been thinking a lot about what happened at Ashton Manor, about everything that led to that night. I realized something I should have seen years ago. I've never really given your family a chance to know me, just as mine never gave you that chance. The admission hung between us, simple but profound. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. He considered the question carefully. Fear, I think. Fear that they would see through me, see all the ways I wasn't good enough. It was easier to keep distance, to meet occasionally and exchange pleasantries without forming real connections. My parents aren't like that, Jonathan. They don't measure people by their achievements or failures. I know that now. He squeezed my hand gently. I want to try again. With them. With us. With everything. Later that night, as we prepared for bed, I found myself studying Jonathan with new eyes. He moved around our bedroom with a different energy, more present, more deliberate in his actions. When he caught me watching him, he didn't look away as he might have before. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking about visibility, I said. About how we choose what we see and what we hide. He sat on the edge of the bed. For too long, I was hiding parts of myself from everyone. From my family, from yours, even from you. It was exhausting. And now? Now I'm trying to stand in the light. All of me. He looked up at me. It's terrifying. I sat beside him. Yes, it is. Is that how you felt? All those times with my family? I nodded. Every dinner, every holiday, every casual comment that diminished who I was. It was like slowly disappearing, piece by piece. I'm so sorry, Leila. His voice caught. I can't change what happened, but I promise you won't face that alone again. Not from them, not from anyone. I believed him, not because the words were perfect, but because I could see the effort behind them. The genuine attempt to understand, to grow, to build something better than what had come before. "One day at a time," I said, taking his hand. It wasn't full forgiveness, not yet, but it was an opening, a willingness to walk forward together and see what might be possible. The next evening, we arrived at my parents' brownstone in Park Slope, just as the sun was setting. Unlike the Preston's Southampton mansion or their Manhattan penthouse, my parents' home was warm and lived in, filled with a carefully curated collection of art, books, and mementos from their travels. My mother, Noor, answered the door herself, something Elizabeth would never have considered. At 60, she remained striking, tall and elegant, with silver streaks in her dark hair, her eyes the same deep brown as mine. "Habibti," she said warmly, embracing me before turning to Jonathan with an evaluating gaze. "And the husband, finally joining us for a proper dinner." Jonathan accepted her gentle ribbing with good humor. "I've been looking forward to it, Mrs. Corey." "Noor, please." Mrs. Corey makes me sound like my mother-in-law. She ushered us inside. Samir is in the kitchen, arguing with the bread as usual. We followed her through the house, passing walls lined with family photographs, my childhood in New York, my parents' early days in Beirut, graduations, celebrations, moments of ordinary joy captured and preserved. Jonathan paused to study them, paying attention in a way he never had during previous visits. In the kitchen, my father was indeed engaged in what appeared to be a standoff, with a tray of Manikish traditional Lebanese flatbreads topped with za'atar. "They're too thick," he was muttering to himself. "Your mother would be disappointed." "Baba," I called, "they look perfect." He turned, his face lighting up. "Leila! And Jonathan! Come, tell me if these are too thick. Your grandmother could make them thin as paper, but mine always turn out like pillows." Jonathan stepped forward, genuinely interested. "They smell amazing. What's the green topping?" My father launched into an enthusiastic explanation of za'atar, the blend of herbs, sesame seeds, and sumac that was a staple of Lebanese cuisine. To my surprise, Jonathan asked thoughtful questions, even accepting my father's offer to try making one himself. As the evening progressed, I watched the careful dance of getting to know each other anew. Jonathan spoke about his work as a public defender, not as a temporary position before joining his father's firm, but as a career he was passionate about. He talked about his struggles with the bar exam without shame, even laughing when my father admitted to failing his architectural licensing exam twice. "The first failure teaches you humility," my father said, refilling Jonathan's glass. "The second teaches you perseverance. The rest is just stubbornness." For the first time, I saw Jonathan truly relaxed around my family, not performing the role of Preston heir, but simply being himself. The change was subtle but profound, like watching someone step out of a shadow they hadn't realized was there. After dinner, my mother insisted on showing Jonathan my childhood bedroom, preserved largely as I had left it when I moved out for college. I followed them upstairs, both amused and touched by her enthusiasm. "Look at these," she said, indicating a shelf of trophies and medals. "Academic decathlon, Model UN, regional chess champion." Leila was always unstoppable once she set her mind to something. Jonathan examined each award with genuine interest. "I had no idea you played chess competitively." "There's a lot you don't know about me," I said, but without bitterness. It was simply a fact, one we were both working to change. "I'm learning," he replied, meeting my gaze with quiet determination. Later, as we prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside while my mother was showing Jonathan her prized collection of rare books. "He's different," he observed, "more present." "Yes," I agreed, "he's trying." "And you? Are you happy, Habibti?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm hopeful. It's a start." My father nodded, understanding the nuance. Sometimes the strongest foundations are built after the first attempt fails. You clear away the debris and start again, with better knowledge and stronger materials. As we drove home through the Brooklyn night, Jonathan was unusually quiet, lost in thought. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Better than okay," he said. "I was just thinking about your parents, about how they see you, how they've always seen you." "What do you mean?" "They know every part of you, your accomplishments, your struggles, your quirks and talents. They celebrate all of it without trying to reshape you into something else." He glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. "The way my family has always tried to reshape me." "The difference," I said gently, "is that my parents believe success is finding your own path. Yours believe it's following the one they've already mapped out." He nodded slowly. "I've spent my whole life trying to fit into that map. Even when I rebelled, it was still in reaction to their expectations." "And now?" "Now I'm trying to draw my own map." He reached for my hand. "One that has you at the center of it, not as an addition to the Preston legacy, but as a partner in creating something new." The words settled between us like a promise. Fragile still, but sincere. When we arrived home, Jonathan paused at our door. "Thank you for tonight, for sharing your family with me, again." "They've always been there," I reminded him, "waiting to know you." "I know," he acknowledged. "I just wasn't ready to be known." As we stepped inside our home, I felt something shift and settle. Not a complete transformation, but a step toward a new way of being together. One where both of us could be fully seen, with all our complexities and contradictions. The journey ahead wouldn't be simple or straightforward. There would be missteps and old patterns to break. But for the first time since the night at Ashton Manor, I felt truly hopeful that what we were building might be stronger and more authentic than what had come before. Not because of grand revelations or dramatic confrontations, but because we were both finally standing in the light, willing to see and be seen in all our imperfect humanity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.